I'm Kirk Hanson, Executive Director of the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. We're here to talk about patterns of fraud in companies in the Chinese market. We're here to talk about how you build an ethical culture in China. I'm delighted to have as our guest Jacqueline Fan, who is a partner in the Ernst Young Fraud Investigation and Dispute Services Group. She is the head of the group's practice in Beijing and is herself American, having been raised in the United States, attended NYU, INSEAD for her MBA. She's a certified fraud examiner and part of a practice in Ernst Young and other organizations that has become expert on looking at corporate fraud and conducting corporate investigations. So delighted to have you here.
Thank you. Kirk.
Good. I'm interested in what patterns you've seen in the Chinese market. And these are both Western companies operating in China and Chinese companies. But Ernst Young is called in to do investigations. So what patterns do you see? What kind of problems?
Well, I mean, of course, fraud exists for thousands of years. Some of the patterns may not be particularly unique to China market, but in particular, I think a lot of the clients that we serve are multinationals. They have to comply with their own regulations and rules. So anti-corruption, anti-bribery is a big issue they face in China. So we face a lot of the corruption and bribery investigations that's related to FCPA, UK Bribery Act, and China has its own code for anti-corruption, anti-bribery. That's one type. And another one more traditionally for the occupational fraud space, we see a lot of supply chain issues in China. That's natural with the fast economy growth and rapid growth in the past 10, 20 years. The third one is fairly recent. There are a lot of Chinese companies listed in the US or other listings, and they have run into financial statement fraud issues.
Ah, okay. And so because they're listed both in China and in the West, or one or the other, those all become legal issues now that they're listed. Are there any particular patterns you see in terms of why these particular frauds have emerged, or what kinds of conditions lead to these frauds? Is there anything you can point to in terms of patterns, at least in the Chinese market?
Well, I think for the anti-corruption, anti-bribery culture, for the last 20 years, 30 years, the huge growth in Chinese market and then transition from a very largely state-owned economy to privatized economy, there's huge incentive for people to get rich quick. And then there are a lot of opportunities for people to get business. So that has the incentive to for lack of a better word, promote the corruption and bribery culture for a company to get business quickly.
Rapid transition in the economy, formation of lots of businesses. Deng Xiaoping said it's okay for a few to get rich, and some of them do it in appropriate ways and some in inappropriate ways.
Right. And then also it's the definition of corruption and bribery. It may not be so clear cut. There are a lot of gray areas. It may be acceptable in Chinese culture, but it may not be acceptable for a Western company under their own code of conduct.
More of your investigations driven by Chinese law, Chinese laws against corruption, Chinese laws against environmental and worker safety issues, for example?
Well, I think at this point more of the investigations are driven by the multinational companies, not by Chinese law at this point, unfortunately.
In your work, have you come to see some of the things companies can do to create more of a culture of ethical behavior in Chinese companies? I'm interested in whether it's different than you might have for an American company or a European company, but what are some of the things you can do in the Chinese culture to help build an ethical company?
Well, definitely have to have a code of conduct, and don't just adopt everything from globally. Try to localize a little bit, and then try to convey the message to your employees in China. Don't just rubber stamp it thinking I have a perfect set of policy. You do need to have trainings and then have clear guidance to your employees. I see a lot of companies making the mistake assuming that this is common knowledge. You should know right or wrong. Don't assume that in a different market because their set of understanding of right and wrongs may be very different from yours.
And so do you communicate in very different ways to a Chinese market group of workers than you would in the U.S. or whatever?
Not necessarily so, but then for the training, I would recommend doing it in local language.
Yes.
Well, it's hard to believe, but there are still a lot of companies trying to do it in English. And then also, don't just introduce your global code of conduct or the FCPA concept. Try to integrate with the Chinese laws and regulations, how it relates to their everyday operation, and have case studies. So they have something to relate to and to understand this is really related to their everyday work.
And not just to Western values.
Not just a headquarters trying to stick it to you.
Very good. Jackie, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.